What's going on, boomers and doomers? Today we're going to be talking about something very interesting and near and dear to my heart. Airsoft has never been easier to get into. Even on the lower affordable end of things, there are still plenty of great AEGs that you can get out there for a very, very good deal. But it wasn't always like this. If anything, there were actually quite a few differences that we've seen in the last couple years. So I wanted to talk about the history of Airsoft, and more specifically, the staple Airsoft gun in the US, the M4 AEG. The gun sitting in front of me is the Mayo Gang MGC4 Mark III. Product placement, but this would be considered the quintessential modern cutting-edge AEG. However, it wasn't always something that looked like this. Oh no, it actually looked quite different back in the day. If we rewind the clock, it would actually look a little bit something more along the lines of this. What a difference, something like the Tokyo Marui 733 AEG. Now obviously there's going to be a ton of differences here, everything from the externals and even the internals as well, which we're going to be getting into right now. Now the 733 that I have in front of me definitely looks old and really feels old. This is not even the first AEG to come out. Oh no, it was something completely different. So in order to talk about that, we actually have to first talk about the history of Airsoft and how it was even conceived. Now let's rewind the clock and transport ourselves to the 70s in Japan, where firearms enthusiasts and law enforcement were not able to train with real firearms. Now at the time, air guns were available, but that wasn't really what they wanted to go for, as they shot at too high of a velocity. They wanted something a little bit different, so they turned to companies like Tokyo Marui and a slew of other, at the time, infant companies like that were using very similar to air guns, realistic replicas that use compressed air. However, they were using a much lower amount and they were shooting a much softer than metal 6mm plastic BB. So that sort of term, soft air guns, eventually became airsoft guns as we know it today. For those that might be scratching your head right now wondering why did they have to go down that specific route in order to do this, there's a very particular set of reasons why, chief amongst which is going to be firearms ownership was nearly impossible across all of Asia, especially Japan. And all replica firearms that were being produced had a very particular set of rules and laws that they had to meet and accommodate by in order to be sold legally and purchased. The very first serious airsoft guns, believe it or not, back then weren't even electric. They were actually gas powered. They were using compressed air. Now, it was Tokyo Marui that actually sort of broke the mold and revolutionized the entire game by coming out with an electric gun, or automatic electric gun, the AEG as we know it. Now, like I said before, this 733 in front of me is very old, but it is not the very first AEG. Oh no. TM came out with the very first automatic electric gun in the form of, believe it or not, a FAMAS F1 with the version 1 gearbox. Now, why specifically a FAMAS? I have no idea, and I wish I could show it off to you guys as well, but it's just that old. It belongs in a museum. Now, the F1 featured the version 1 gearbox, which uses the same gearbox sort of design and components that we're more accustomed to. The 3-piece gear system, the motor pulling back a spring, and then launching an air nozzle forward, using that air compression to push a BB through the inner barrel. This is the system that we're familiar with, but this is still the version 1 gearbox. Eventually, they would come out with the Tokyo Marui MP5, which uses the version 2 gearbox, the one that we're all familiar with. Now, as you can see on the timeline, there is still no M16, there's still no 733. That was to come after the MP5. However, it is still using the same version 2 gearbox that was featured then and is still being used to this day. Now let's skip forward a little bit. After the release of the MP5, eventually TM does come out with the M16 using the version 2 gearbox. And this is when that sort of naming convention of the gearboxes starts to come out. You have the FAMAS F1 with the version 1, MP5, M16 using the version 2, AKG3 using the version 3, and so on and so forth. Now, around this same time, you do have Airsoft blowing up all across Asia. Firearms ownership across Asia just wasn't a thing. It was nearly impossible. So they went with the next best thing, and a lot of enthusiasts decided to use these for simulated war games, often referred to as survival games, which is actually still what they're using to refer to Airsoft as we know it. All right, TM, you did it. Well done, boys. We can go to the bar now. We did it. We made the perfect Airsoft gun. We can go home now, right? We're done? Obviously not. Even back then, there were a few things that were left to be desired on these old school Tokyo Marui airsoft guns. For starters, the body. It's made out of some pretty weak plastic. You drop this thing, I almost guarantee it that you're gonna break something. All right, fine, whatever. It's not all bad. right? You do get some metal components here and there, including the buffer tube and the outer barrel. However, that outer barrel is not perfect. It is using what's referred to as a 3-piece outer barrel system, each piece being held together by some set screws. Those set screws wear down pretty dang easily, leaving you with a pretty wobbly outer barrel or very loose. It's just not good. I don't know why they went with that, but so be it. I think the worst offender though does have to be the hopper chamber. The hopper chamber itself is actually using an old school dial system, which is fine. Again, rotary hasn't been invented yet. And it is kind of cool how the gun actually does break apart. You actually remove the rear body pin in order to access the hopper chamber. But upon further inspection, the hopper chamber itself is quite different than what we're used to. I'm gonna go open this up. It's actually using a 2-piece hopper chamber. Now this 2-piece hopper chamber does function well enough. It does work and feed consistently. The biggest problem though has got to be the fact that it does lose a lot of air compression throughout its usage, right? Now, these are all nitpicky things at the end of the day, but they were done for a very specific reason. Remember, in Japan, they had very specific laws that they needed to adhere to. Full metal receivers just weren't allowed. And of course, they didn't want to risk getting too high of a muzzle velocity, right? Be able to go and tighten that air compression too much and risk having the gun shoot too hot, right? At that point, it would be considered an actual firearm, which would be illegal to sell. We wouldn't have it if they didn't do it that way. Only thing though, why the 3-piece? Still, I can't figure out why. It is what it is. Just to give an idea as to how fragile these things really are, this is a piece of the upper receiver. This broke off the very first time we tried to split the body in order to access the hop-up chamber. It is what it is. It just goes to show that these are more of a novelty item and not so much a hard sporting good item. However, that wasn't good enough for the rest of Asia. In order to meet the demands, Taiwanese companies and more started coming out with their own takes on the original Tokyo Marui system. Classic Army being the first to clone the TM gun, specifically an MP5. However, they wanted to make it a little bit closer to the real deal, so they decided to go ahead and add a full metal receiver group to it. ICS did something very similar. They, getting their start into the aftermarket scene, offered a full metal MP5 receiver kit, which was actually really, really cool. But this is when we start seeing more companies coming out and offering more innovation. Companies like G&G, Classic Army, cloning the original Japanese system but adding their own spin to it. Even ICS, more or less sticking to that original design, but innovating even further with things like their split gearbox design. Around this time in the mid-2000s, Airsoft is taking center stage and becoming more and more increasingly popular, especially in the United States. This, my friends, is when China gets involved. Now, most serious airsoft guns available on the market were either going to be Japanese or were going to be Taiwanese. Now, China enters the scene because they were willing to offer very similar products but at a much more affordable price point. So while Airsoft was indeed taking off globally, there was still a big barrier of entry, and that of course being the higher cost to get started. It cost several hundreds of dollars in order to get yourself a viable option back then. So when China started entering the scene and offering brands like SEMA, Echo One, JG, these are all guns that were based off the original Japanese Tokyo Marui system, but at a much more affordable price point and allowed more players to get into this hobby. So due to the fact that these more affordable options were still cloning the original Japanese Tokyo Marui system, there was still an aftermarket scene for it. There were still parts readily available for players to upgrade. Now, the guns themselves may or may not have felt the most satisfying in the user's hands, but a lot of players didn't mind that because they knew in the back of their minds, the minute that something breaks, they'd be able to easily acquire the upgrade components for it and be able to easily install it. This is sort of where that sort of teching scene really started to take off. When you had a bunch of players getting into the scene with more affordable options, wanting to build theirs up and really make it a true custom. The gun that I have in front of me is very evident of the time. You can tell by the build quality, still using that cheap plastic. Now at this time, polymer guns weren't that common, G&G being the most famous brand out there for coming out with a full polymer receiver group. Most companies though just weren't quite there yet. They were still playing catch up. Of course, you would still have a lot of older components on here from the original Japanese system, like the hop-up chamber, the outer barrel, even the buffer tube, but everything that you see here, including the full metal gearbox you have inside, is still that standard version 2. Even the externals can be fully changed out for whatever it is that you wanted. Even the receiver group could be changed out for a metal one, should you choose to go that route. To help paint a picture as to what the scene was like for Airsoft in the late 2000s, early 2010s, you had VFC, KWA, and Crytek as the new kids on the block, really focusing on innovating, pushing the envelope of what the AEG was capable of, offering newer internals and externals as well that were of the premium, highest quality. You had some other older brands as well, like Classic Army and ICS, still coming out with different platforms, still cloning the original Tokyo Marui system. And then of course, you have the clones of the clones, the Chinese brands coming out with different platforms as well, eventually working their way up to a full metal receiver group as well. Jumping ahead in time a little bit to the mid-2010s, you had high-end brands doing what they do best and really pushing the envelope of what's possible for an AEG. You have brands like Crytek and VFC really pushing the envelope and including so much out of the box, including an electronic trigger unit, higher quality components, Type 4 barrels. All these are things that you would normally have to spend extra money on to have installed into your gun, and they're just deciding to do it right out the box, which was super cool. You even have beginner brands and intermediate brands models coming out with polymer guns. That's right, they've done away entirely with that crappy plastic and have full polymer receiver groups and more. This time period from the mid to late 2010s is what we like to refer to as the golden age of the AEG. High-end brands are offering more and more tech, really pushing the envelope and really focusing on innovating, while a lot of the mid to beginner brands and models are offering so much value for the money. It didn't almost really matter what brand you went with because all of them were really solid. It was so easy to get into the hobby, making it so much more accessible for a lot of newer players to get into. But fast forwarding to present day, right now, what does the airsoft scene look like? Well, we're still kind of surfing that wave from the mid to late 2010s, where there's all this technology, all this cool new innovation. But what we're seeing now is it's sort of plateaued. What's cool about this current era is that a lot of that tech that was only accessible to the high-end models have kind of disseminated down to even the most beginner-friendly options. But we are still kind of what I would regard as kind of a dark ages for the AEG. There isn't any groundbreaking or new earth-shaking technology that's completely shaking the game for everyone. If anything, we're starting to see more innovation really being focused on the gas blowback side of things, but that's a whole other video for another time. Thank you guys so much for tuning into my history lesson. This has been an in-depth, broad, I guess, more or less, a history lesson on the AEG as we know it, from its inception in Japan to what we define it as today, and why certain things in Airsoft are the way that they are. If you like this video and you want to see more history lessons with me, feel free to go ahead and leave a like on this video. Make sure that you're subscribed, and of course, hit that bell icon so you're notified every time we drop new content. Make sure to share this around, leave a comment as well. Do you like Airsoft guns as they stand now? Do you not see as much innovation? Do you want to focus more on the gas blowback side of things? Let me know in the comment section. If you want to get our own brand of AEGs, make sure to go ahead and check out our line of Mayo Gang MGC4s available on the website and in store as well. My name has been Isaias, guys. Take it easy.